Hi everybody, this is Katje, and tonight I'd like to make a video in which I cover a couple of topics briefly. One is there was another makeup mistake that I forgot to mention in my last video. It's one of the mistakes that I've made, and so I wanted to share that with you and tell you how I made changes there and what I've learned from it. And then the second thing I want to talk about a little bit tonight is I recently came across a very interesting video that was about something that happened where I grew up about 20 years ago, actually about 21 years ago. I had not seen this video, but it got me to thinking about these incidents because I remember them. So I wanted to say something about that. But first, let me just talk a little bit about the other makeup mistake that I've made, and this one has to do with applying rouge to the cheeks. So I like to use a nice reddish or even a mauvish color, but a nice red tone to bring color into the cheeks. And what I was doing at one point, I have my rouge brush here, and so what I was doing at one point is I would be dotting the cheeks here, and then I would do the cheekbones and sort of coming down the cheekbones towards the nose like this. So what I learned from that is that not to do the dots, at least not on my face, because it sort of looked like Raggedy Ann. It sort of looked like a doll face, so I didn't really think that was a good look. What I do now is simply highlight the cheekbones. So I start basically from the ear and I come down the cheekbones and I end on either side of the nose where I brush in a little bit more color, and I find that is a very good way of not only applying rouge, but it also is a way of contouring the cheekbones so that it makes them stand out. So it does that, and it brings color into the face without creating this sort of Raggedy Ann look, which you'll get if you also apply rouge to the cheeks themselves. So that was the makeup mistake that I wanted to talk about. Now, the video that I came across was actually describing a terrible crime that took place in the part of Tennessee, or near the part of Tennessee, the town where I grew up. And this happened back in 1997, so I was much younger then, but I do remember when these murders occurred. And basically the video that I saw was they were revisiting these crimes because the people who committed them were convicted of them and were sentenced to life in prison, but there was the chief prosecutor was interviewed in the course of this video, which was about 6.5 minutes long, and I think the chief investigator, the chief detective who handled the case, and they were saying some things about what happened that I wanted to just comment on briefly. So let me say something about that. Basically, the crimes that I have in mind were called the Lillelid murders. That's Lillelid. Lillelid was the name of a family. They were actually Jehovah's Witnesses, who I think that the father was originally from Norway or Sweden, I'm not sure. I think he was from Norway, and then he met a woman from Honduras. They got married and eventually moved to the part of Tennessee where I grew up. So what happened very briefly was on the night that these murders were committed, this family, there was the father and the mother, and then they had 2 children, a girl and a boy. I think the boy was he was basically 1.5 or 2, and the girl was maybe 3 or 4, somewhere in there. So they had been to some kind of revival or some kind of church function in a nearby city, and they were coming home and stopped at halted at a rest stop that was on the interstate just outside the town where I grew up. Now, at the same time, at this rest stop, there were these 6 young people who were actually from Kentucky. They were all teenagers, or maybe they were no more than their early 20s. So they were fairly young, and they were coming down from Kentucky and basically just sort of riding all over the country, just kind of on a spree, just kind of on a lark. So they had stopped at this rest stop as well, and it emerged that in the course, when the trial actually started, it emerged that these young people had been dealing with the occult, and one of them was very much into that. It was a young woman named Natasha, and so she was designated sort of as the ringleader of this group. So to make a long story short, what happened is that the young people were approached by the family, the Plaid family, I think the father, who began to talk to them about his faith and maybe to try to draw them out, and things went downhill from there. The young people basically decided that they wanted the van, the Plaid family van. So they took the family and forced them into the van at gunpoint. They drove the van to a remote road a few miles away from the rest stop, and they shot them one at a time. I think they actually ran over the little boy, and the end result was that the parents and the girl died. The little boy survived, but he was shot through the eye, and so he had to have a glass eye. But he did survive, and he's still alive today. I think he's in his early 20s at this point. So then there was a trial, and without too many surprises, the 6 young people were convicted of capital murder, and they were sentenced to life in prison. They weren't given the death penalty. Now, what I wanted to talk about briefly in reaction to this video is that in their different ways, both the chief prosecutor in the case and the investigating officer were correctly, I think, describing this incident, these murders, as a heinous evil. I mean, it was really evil what happened there. There was something, it wasn't just illegal or bad, there was something radically evil about what these young people did. So then the question was, well, exactly what was so evil about it? And in the course of the video, certain answers were suggested that I don't think get completely to the heart of the matter. So, for example, at one point, the prosecuting attorney was saying, well, when these young people kidnapped the Plaid family and took them down this road and then shot them, they were laughing, and he felt that was an indication of evil. But when I think about this, I'm reminded of something Marcus Aurelius actually said, which is, in order to discover something, what something is, you need to ask, well, what is its nature? Not just the incidentals that accompany it, the accidents, but what is it in its core? What is its nature? Now, of course, it's certainly wrong to shoot innocent people, but on the other hand, that doesn't necessarily by itself rise to the level of radical evil, which is what I think happened in this particular case, in this particular incident. That's an example of that. Certainly stealing a van by itself is illegal and it's wrong, but is it radically evil? Well, that's not really clear. Even shooting somebody, an innocent person, again, that's not necessarily in itself evil. There are times when we would just say, well, that was against the law, and it doesn't really create this sense, this unsettling sense by itself of radical evil. So what was it about these crimes that made them rise to that level, that made it appropriate? What is it in their essence that made them an example of something that really was quite evil? And I think it's this. The reason that emerged in the course of the trial, why was it that these young people killed the Plaid family, and what was the motive? Because in any crime we want to know, well, what is the motive? And it turns out that they were driving across country in this very small compact car, and so when they were at the rest stop, the Plaid family drove up in a van. So the young people noticed this van and realized that, well, look, here, this vehicle has a lot more space, a lot more room in it, and so we would prefer to have the van, to take the van and get rid of this, rattle trap compact car. So what they decided to do was not just to steal the van, but they decided to take the van, kill the people, so that they wouldn't be able to identify them, and then they would now have a roomier vehicle that they could drive around the country in. And eventually they made it all the way to the border of Mexico. I think they were right at Douglas, Arizona, where they were apprehended by border control guards or the crossing guards who did a computer check and identified the vehicle as that one that had been taken from the family. So here, I think, is the essence of what makes this crime evil. And it's that there's a subversion, a radical subversion or reversal of what we deem to be more valuable. What is more or less valuable? The scale of values, if you will. So, as we ordinarily think, obviously, human life and the desire to protect innocent human life especially is much more valuable than getting a roomier vehicle, because it'll be more comfortable and it'll be more convenient. That might be a nice thing to have, obviously, but on the normal scale of value, we certainly don't put the desire to have a roomier vehicle over the value of innocent, or any other, for that matter, human life. That's exactly what the 6 suspects and convicted criminals in this case did. They radically subverted or inverted, reversed the scale of values by valuing this roomier vehicle more than they did the people that they shot one at a time and even ran over one of them. And so to me, that's the essence of evil. What makes radical evil especially, what makes something radically evil is when it upsets our normal sense of what is more or less valuable and turns it upside down or topsy-turvy. That's what happened. Now, there are, of course, other incidentals. These young people were interested in the occult. There are indications that they were interested in Satanism, and that I think Natasha, the ringleader, actually claimed several times to have heard voices that were urging her on to do things like this, and maybe even at the time of the crime, she was doing that. These voices were there, and I certainly wouldn't rule out that there was some kind of malevolent supernatural presence that was urging her and maybe them on. But again, I don't want to take a stand on that necessarily, because that's not what makes what they did essentially evil. That's not the nature of this evil act. What makes it wicked, what makes it so disturbingly evil, is this radical inversion of values and the desire to put one's preference or desire for a roomier vehicle ahead of one's respect and protection, the need to protect human life. That's what really makes it evil. So I would have to take issue with what the prosecuting attorney was saying. And lastly, what I want to say about this is the following. The chief investigating detective said that there's no way that we can really predict this sort of evil act. It's almost like a lightning strike. We can consult psychologists and we can consult psychiatrists and we can do all kinds of studies about it, and maybe a lot of money and time has been exerted on those studies, but they don't really enable us to predict very, very well, at least, with a high degree of accuracy, when something like this is going to happen. And I tend to agree with him about that. But I think that's only part of it. I think that what we can do is, once we understand what makes something radically evil, through this radical subversion of what we ordinarily judge to be more or less valuable, when we become aware of that, then we can try to be more mindful of when people seem to be tempted to do that, or we can try to instill more respect for those values, especially in young people. We can try to talk to them. we can at least be somewhat forewarned if we know what it is we want to avoid, if we know what evil is, if we know what it looks like, if we know to quote, or to go back to Marcus Aurelius for just a minute, if we know what its nature is, then we are better prepared to recognize it or try to create circumstances where that doesn't happen. So we're forewarned, and so we're better prepared. Now that's all I wanted to say tonight. I am wearing my thigh-length black boots and a short skirt and a plaid top, but I hope that you found this interesting. I just wanted to share my reflections with you on that video and also another makeup tip. So until next time, this is Katje Eckhart. I'm thanking you all for joining me, and I hope that everybody has a very restful and enjoyable evening. Bye-bye.